So my book talks about a lot of documented cases of miracles taking place. But to me, the most amazing healing that I encountered, and I get goosebumps when I talk about it, involves a woman by the name of Barbara Snyder. Barbara Snyder, I've interviewed her at length. We have years and years of her medical reports and examinations from the Mayo Clinic and from multiple physicians. We have multiple credible eyewitnesses who have no motive to deceive. We have 2 physicians of hers that were so blown away by what happened to her, they wrote about it in books. So what happened to Barbara? Well, Barbara, at a rather young age, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And over the succeeding years, she deteriorated at a rapid pace. There were multiple hospitalizations, multiple surgeries, until finally she was in hospice at home. She was dying. One of her physicians, Dr. Harold P. Adolph, a board-certified surgeon who'd conducted more than 25,000 surgeries in his career, he called Barbara, quote, one of the most hopelessly ill patients I ever saw. One of her lungs was non-functional. The other lung was only functioning at 50%. She had a tube inserted into her neck that went to oxygen canisters in her garage that would pump oxygen into her neck so she could breathe. She'd lost control of her urination and bowels. She was legally blind. All she could see were vague gray shapes and shadows. A feeding tube was inserted into her stomach. She hadn't walked in 7 years, and so her legs had shrunken down. The muscles had atrophied to nothing. Her hands, she was curled up like a pretzel in bed. Her fingers were curled back so that they were touching her wrists. Her feet were permanently extended. She was just like a pretzel curled up. And her parents and her doctors met, and they concluded, there's nothing more we can do. She's going to die. And so they said the next time she gets pneumonia, which she would get on a regular basis because of her impaired lung functions, said next time she gets pneumonia, let's not resuscitate her. We'll just let her die, because otherwise it's just prolonging the inevitable. Well, one day, a friend of Barbara's called up WMBI, which is a Christian radio station in Chicago where Barbara lived, radio station owned by the Moody Bible Institute, and said, would you please put out the word on your station for people to pray for Barbara because she's dying. And so we know that 450 people at a minimum began to pray for Barbara's healing. How do we know? Because 450 Christians wrote letters to Barbara saying, I'm praying for you. And so one day, happened to be Pentecost Sunday, she was in her room, and 2 of her friends were reading her some of the letters of encouragement and prayer that they had received. But I'm going to let Barbara tell you exactly what happened on that day. So here's Barbara.
June 7th, 1981, I'll never forget it. It was a day like any other day for me. That was one spent confined to bed, unable to breathe on my own, hooked up to machines, a tracheostomy tube in my neck, my arms curled up, my legs curled up. I lay there trapped inside my own body is really how it felt. I had 2 friends over. They came over all the time. They were from my church. My church family never forgot me. So while they were there, I still remember exactly what they were reading when all of a sudden I heard a booming, authoritative, loud voice over my shoulder over here say, my child, get up and walk.
And there was nobody else in the room?
And there was no one else in the room, and the door was over here. There were windows over this way. And instantly, I knew it was God. But instantly, I also knew that my friends didn't hear that, which is kind of interesting, too.
Yeah.
And I needed to share with them what I heard. Well, I had this tracheostomy tube in my neck. That's how I breathed. And I had hands that did not work. So my friends said whenever I looked agitated, they knew I wanted to talk. So they'd come and plug the hole in my neck. And I said, I don't know what you're going to think about this, but God just told me to get up and walk. And my friends got really quiet. I know, but he really did tell me to get up and walk. Run. get my family. I want them to be here. And my friends all of a sudden jumped up, and while they jumped, so did I. I was so excited I couldn't wait for anyone. And I literally jumped out of the bed. This is where you'd almost have to have known me to see how totally impossible that was. So this time, I remember reaching up and pulling my oxygen off my neck. I remember that. And then I jumped toward the voice. My friends are over here, but I jumped towards the voice. And as I jumped up, the first thing I remember isn't what I would think I would remember, but I jumped out of the bed and I looked and I saw my feet. They were flat on the ground, just like everyone else's, which sounds normal, but not for me. I had foot drops so badly I couldn't even wear slippers on my feet. They were so curled. So when I jumped up to have feet flat, I was amazed and stood staring at my feet. And when I did that, I jumped like this, and then I saw my hands. And they were open, and they never opened. And so now they were open, and I stood staring at them, and then it dawned on me I could see me. That's what I would have thought I would have noticed first, was my vision. But I didn't.
It was back, you could see.
It was back. I was perfectly fine. And I stood staring again for a little while, just feeling what it felt like to look at and see me. And then I turned, and that's when we were like women. We all started jumping up and down, screaming and thanking the Lord. I remember I didn't understand anything, except where once I was real sick, I was well again. And it has to be God. That's all I knew.
Barbara was instantly and thoroughly healed of multiple sclerosis. All of her bodily functions instantly restored. In fact, her mother came running into the room with Barbara standing there, and her mother went down on her knees and grabbed Barbara's legs and said, "You have muscles again. Your calves are back." Your atrophied legs had actually got their muscle tone instantly returned. Her father comes running in, grabs her, and they begin waltzing around the family room. Well, that night, there was a church service at the church they attended, Wesleyan Church in Wheaton, Illinois. And the pastor's up there, and he says, "Does anybody have any announcements?" And Barbara starts walking down the center aisle. And all anybody had known in this church was Barbara in a wheelchair, Barbara dying, Barbara curled up. And they see her walking down the aisle, and the whole congregation just spontaneously begins singing, "Amazing Grace, I once was blind, but now I see." The next day, she went to see one of her physicians, Dr. Thomas Marshall, an internist with 30 years of experience. And he said later, "When I saw her walking down the corridor toward me, my first thought was, oh, she died and that's a ghost." Because he said, quote, "This is medically impossible." Medically impossible. Friends, God instantly, completely, astoundingly healed Barbara in one miraculous moment. There is no natural explanation for this. Besides, how do you explain away this voice that she heard telling her to do something ridiculous and impossible, like get up and walk? Today, it's been more than 30 years since she was healed. She is healthier than I am, and she's married now to a pastor. And they pastor a little Wesleyan church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Her physician, Dr. Marshall, wrote this: "I have never witnessed anything like this before or since, and I considered it a rare privilege to observe the hand of God performing a true miracle."